Chapter 11. Although it was late into the night, Stefano, Daniel and Gabby couldn't get to sleep. Salangi had told the boys to take the spare room on the second floor, where they had found a single bed and a pull-out couch already fitted with sheets and blankets. For Gabby, Salangi had prepared another room off the landing for her. It was small, but the bed was inviting enough, and Gabby accepted the accommodation with a gracious smile. As for Malou, Salangi had told her to stay in the den where she could sleep on the large sofa comfortably.
"It's better for you to stay here with the book, dear,"
Salangi had said as she had brought the blanket and pillow to her.
"I don't think it would be a good idea for the book and its key to get into the children's hands before morning."
A little curious, Malou had asked, "Why would that be?"
"The best way I could explain it is with the old adage, curiosity kills the cat,"
Salangi had replied with a hint of a smile. "Do you think Mum has left the book in the den?" Stefano asked Daniel, turning to look at his brother. "Or she's sleeping with it under a pillow. Do we even know which room she's staying in?" Daniel asked by way of a reply. "And why do you think we've got to wait till morning to open it?" "Well, for one thing, it's not a good idea to start a journey during the night like Salangi said. And for another, I don't know, Daniel, but I sure hope Mum doesn't open it by herself." "She wouldn't do that." Daniel sat up suddenly. "What about Gabby? Do you think she would sneak downstairs and open it? Come on, Daniel. I know this trip is all in our imagination, but that would be going too far, even for our curious sister." A knock at the door interrupted their quiet conversation. Stefano was up with a jolt and went to plant himself beside the door, an ear against it.
"Who is it?"
he whispered.
"Gabby, I just want to talk."
Stefano opened the door and let his sister in. "What about?" he asked, closing it quietly. "I'm just worried about Mum. She's not upstairs. I think she's sleeping in the den. I saw Miss Salangi take a blanket and a pillow from the linen closet and bringing it down with her. I don't think there's anything to worry about. Mum is probably sleeping on the sofa. But why would you worry where she's sleeping?"
"I don't know, but this house is a little creepy. I mean, with all these books that are supposed to be related to people's problems, it's not very comforting."
Gabby shrugged.
"I don't know, Stefano. It would be nice if the morning came right now."
"Okay, but why don't you and Daniel stay in this room and I'll take yours?" He looked into his sister's worried eyes. "Come here, you silly," he added, taking her into his arms and hugging her. "Besides, there's nothing to worry about during the night. Remember, we all got a dream catcher around our necks to make sure no bad dream interrupts our sleep." Gabby nodded and looked down at the amulet as she pushed away from Stefano. "And if you sleep here, you better not snore," Daniel said jokingly, trying to break the tension. "I don't snore," Gabby retorted, grabbing Stefano's pillow and throwing it at Daniel. "Okay, guys, let's cut it out for now, okay?" Stefano urged. "I'll just go to your room," he looked at Gabby, "and you two stay quiet, okay?" As soon as the elevator doors opened on the ground floor and Joe came out, a broad smile shot across his lips. Dan froze. He recognized the older fellow instantly. "Sorry to bother you, Joe," he said quickly before Emilio could place a word in. "But I've lost my keys and I was wondering if I could get a spare from you until I could get a new key cut." "Rough weekend, was it?" Joe said, chortling. "But why did you wait so long to come home?" "Long story," Dan replied. "But since Fabio was away anyway, I thought I'd stay with Gustavo here." He turned to him. "But now I think I'd like to sleep in my own bed tonight." "Hi," Gustavo said, cracking a smile. Emilio observed the exchange in silence, only shooting a quick glance at Gustavo when he saw that Dan had recognized their building manager. "Okay," he said. "I think I'd better be going, or I'm going to be late for my date." "Oh, sorry, Emilio," Dan said. "Shall we see you later, maybe?" "Sure, I'll drop by tomorrow, and if I don't have a hangover," he laughed. "See you then," he added, heading to the door. "Okay then, Dan, why don't you come upstairs and I'll get you a set of keys?" Dan nodded, and he and Gustavo followed Joe back to the elevator. Once upstairs, the two of them stood in the doorway of Joe's apartment, while he fetched a set of keys for Dan. They heard him rummage through a desk. They gathered until he came back, saying, "I almost forgot there's a letter that came for you with the wrong apartment number, 304 instead of 309, handing keys and envelope to Dan. "Thanks a lot for that," Dan said, taking the letter and keys from Joe's hands. "I'll come back with the keys tomorrow as soon as I've got them cut. Is that okay?" Sure," Joe replied. "Just don't lose that set, otherwise you'll be sleeping in front of the door until Fabio gets back." He laughed at the thought. Dan didn't. If there had been no other way, I probably would have already, he mused. "Where are you, Dan?" Malou murmured as she tried to make herself comfortable on the sofa. She touched her amulet and looked up at the ceiling. "Only wish I knew where to look for you. How far back are you gone?" When she finally closed her eyes, all she could see was the ocean swell coming up and drawing down around her. She wasn't swimming or scared. The ocean meant something. But what?
"What does it mean?" What does it mean?" she screamed as the morning light came streaming through the curtains of the den, startling her awake. Out of breath, Malou sat up and looked around her. It was instant recall. She was sitting on the sofa, and the book. The book was under a pillow. She grabbed it and looked at it. Same as the cover of the first book had been. This one also embossed of a dream catcher's web. It was very ornate and seemed to be well preserved. She immediately wondered if she had slept late or if it was early still. Since there was no clock anywhere in the house, she couldn't imagine what time it was. She got up quickly, went to the door and listened. All she heard were plates being deposited on a table. She smiled. Solangi must be up, she thought. Opening the door, she was assaulted by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, baking and bacon. When she burst through the kitchen door, she found her 3 children busy preparing a breakfast feast for everyone. "Hi, Mum," Gabby said with a broad smile. "Are you hungry?" "Hello," Malou replied, still in her bare feet and coming to the table. "Have you seen Solangi yet?" Stefano shook his head in reply. "But we've heard someone moving upstairs after we came down," Daniel said between mouthfuls of pancakes. "How did you sleep?" Still a bit dazed, Malou sat down and poured some coffee in the cup in front of her. "I just had a strange dream." "What about?" Gabby interrupted, coming to take a seat beside her mother. "Just the ocean. I was surrounded by the ocean swell." "Were you scared?" "Oh no, and that's the strange thing. I wasn't scared at all. I just wondered what it meant, that's all." She took a sip of her coffee. "What about you guys? Did you have a good night?" "Well, at first I was a bit uncomfortable sleeping with all these books around me, but when Stefano and I switched, I was fine." "And she didn't snore," Daniel remarked after drinking some orange juice. "Ah, I see everyone is up and about. Good morning to you all," Solangi said happily as she came into the kitchen. "Wow, that's a beautiful dress," Gabby said, admiring Solangi's outfit. The long white gown was trimmed with soft fur and a string of tiny pearls around the wrists, neckline and hem. "Are you going somewhere special?" "You might say that," Solangi replied. "But more of that later, my dear. Have you slept well?" "We did," Malou replied quickly. "Why don't you take a seat and I'll get you some coffee and perhaps some toasts if you want." "Oh, no, dear. Do not bother. I don't need anything for now, thank you." She paused for a fraction of a second before going to sit at the head of the table. "And before you ask, we haven't opened the book yet," Malou said. "The kids just surprised me with breakfast. As soon as they're done, we can get it open, if you think it's okay." She looked at Solangi pleadingly. She and the children were impatient but didn't want to show it. Of course," Solangi said. "But don't rush through breakfast. I'm sure you'll need all the strength you can muster for the journey ahead." "I am glad Joe had a letter for me, since there were no names at the panel downstairs. I wouldn't have known which apartment these keys would open," Dan remarked as he and Gustavo came out of the elevator. "If you had told him what happened, he probably would have told you," Gustavo said in reply. Dan smiled. "But do you realize it's actually the first time I recognized somebody? I was so happy about it, and a little surprised, I might add, but I just wanted to act normal, if you know what I mean." "Yeah, I think I do. This whole thing has been hard on you, hasn't it?" "More than you can imagine, Gustavo," Dan said as they came to a stop in front of the apartment door. "Okay, this is it, 309. This is where I live, my friend." He turned the key in the lock and pushed the door open. They stepped into the hallway hesitantly, yet as soon as Dan saw a red folder on the desk, he smiled. "That's it. That's my mail folder from my mum." He grabbed it as he had found a lost treasure. "Look," he said to Gustavo, opening it for him. "I've got photos of my mum and dad. That's fantastic." "What about the letter Joe gave you? Is that from your folks too?" Dan shook his head. "No, I don't think so." It was still in his hand. He looked at the envelope curiously and then opened it. "It's from my brother. His name is Raphael. You remember, he's the one I saw in a pizza shop." Gustavo waited until Dan finished reading. "So is it good or bad news?" "Well, I guess it's neither. He's just talking about this girl we met. Not very clear, not to me anyway." He looked up from the letter to Gustavo and then dropped it together with the folder on the desk. "Why don't we take a tour of the place?" Gustavo nodded. "You lead and I'll follow." One thing that surprised Gustavo a little was how neat everything looked, and then he remembered that Dan and Fabio were on their way to become Navy officers, and probably pilots at that, so they would have to be as well organized as he himself once was when he joined the army.